Hi, I'm Chris, an interaction designer on the Android Developer Tools team. Material is a design system created by Google to help teams build high-quality digital experiences for Android, iOS, Flutter, and the web. On Android, we recently released Jetpack Compose. It's a new modern UI toolkit that simplifies and accelerates building beautiful UI with Material Design as the default system from the start. Part of the simplification goal of Compose was to make it easier for designers and developers to work together to build for Android, especially for apps that followed Material Design. In fact, we think that Compose is so much simpler to use that even designers could start to use it to build out and prototype their ideas. So today I'm here to show you how you can get started as a designer with Material Design and Jetpack Compose by walking you through building out one of the material studies, Shrine. So what is Shrine? So Shrine, here we are in material.io. Shrine is this beautiful material study that is a retail app. It uses material design components and material theming. And it's kind of like a fashion kind of e-commerce app, but it's got these very unique kind of fun colors. I think one of the most unique parts about it is really the unique shapes, which is one of the pillars of material design, which is shape. Let's see. So if we go through, so this is kind of what we'll be building today. To get started, I do have, so this will be in the description below, but everything that we'll covering today is going to be all uploaded on GitHub, including all the code that we'll walk through and some of the topics that we'll cover. So really, to get started, you'll need Android Studio, Arctic Fox 2020.3.1. To do that, you can just go to, you can just go on the web and Google Android Studio. This is where you'll download it. It's a pretty easy setup, but that's what you'll need to get started. And then once you have that, you'll be using Compose version 1.0 to do that. But it's also, if you do want to follow along while you're building it, it's also useful to kind of go back to the Shrine page on the Material Design website to kind of reference some of the design things that we'll be implementing today. All right, so I guess without further ado, we can I think what we should do really is actually do a little brief intro on what Jetpack Compose is. So Jetpack Compose, as I mentioned before, it's the new modern toolkit that you use to build great UI for Android. We released it very recently, so this is very new. But the idea being that, as a developer, or as I said today, as a designer, it doesn't take a lot to build great UI. I think, in the past, building UI for Android, once you learned it, it was not too hard, but it was pretty hard to get started. And I think one of the hardest things was animations were difficult. I think making any custom components was difficult. And so with Jetpack Compose, we think that will be a lot easier for developers. But I also think, kind of taking a look at this code on the screen, as a designer, I think it's actually pretty simple to read. There is, in this case, Compose is all about these small composable functions. So in this case, we have a composable function, or I kind of like to think about it like if you come from Figma or from Sketch, like in Figma and Sketch, we have components and we have variants. It's a very similar model, which is, you build all these little UI components that build on top of each other. And eventually, once you have a design system and a bunch of components, you can start to build out these larger screens. And I think with Jetpack Compose, it's very similar. So here, we have a simple card, and this is kind of just showing you the preview on like what's on the right. There's a column, which similar to Figma, it's like an auto layout. It puts in a column. We have the image, which is the logo, and then we have some code here. I won't get into this today, but it's kind of showing you like you can easily add animation, which in this case, what happens is if the user clicks on this container, the image will, or sorry, not the image, the text, which says Jetpack Compose will hide and show. And the text so happens to be styled with the material theme typography, the H2 styling. Anyway, that's Jetpack Compose in a nutshell. As I code through Android Studio, it'll be a little easier to walk through. But you can check out this webpage on developer.android.com that has all the details about Compose and how to get started. The other important resource that we will be covering, which because this is material design, Jetpack Compose is material design out of the box. That might seem like a strange or obvious statement, but it so happens, when Android first came out in 2010, material design wasn't there. It wasn't on the scene. And so material design came out around 2014, and then developers, had access to the material design components for Android around 2015, but it was never really material by default. And so when we did Jetpack Compose, we thought, material design is the design language of Google. And so if people are building Android apps, then they should just be using material out of the box. And so that's kind of what we did with Jetpack Compose, is that as you build your first screen, your first button, it is the material button. It is, the material bottom sheet, all the controls that you're familiar with material design. And I just talked about this page here, which is basically just shows you all the documentation you'll need to actually build out the material design components. The way they're arranged is very similar to if you would go to material.io. Actually, in fact, I totally forgot about this. On material.io, so you can either go to developer.android.com or material.io to see how to use the components. But let's say if we go to button. So in button, there's a design tab, which will show you all the details about how material button works and how it's spec'd. But then if you go to the implementation tab, you can use this little drop down to pick the various platforms. But for Android, because we have now Jetpack Compose, you can quickly cross-link to developer.android.com to see how to use it. So you can go to either website to find more information. All right. So with that, what exactly do we plan to build today? So let's jump into Android Studio. So this is Android Studio. There may be many people on the stream today that are not familiar with Android Studio. I'll just give a quick intro to it. Android Studio is the development environment that you want to use if you're building any Android app. It's been around for a while, but it now fully supports building Jetpack Compose applications in Arctic Fox. And so that's what we'll be using today. So what are we building today? Shrine, let me go back to Chrome here. So as we went through Shrine before, Shrine is a full app that was designed. There's a lot of screens and a lot of components in here. As you look, there's a cart screen, there's an item details screen. There are screens where you can kind of browse the entire catalog of the shopping app. And I think, what our plan is, we want to walk people a little more slowly through how to build this actually in code. And so, hopefully if you all like this episode, then we will probably do more episodes where we build this out. But I think for today, what we'll do is we'll just focus on, we will focus on the cart because I think, it's interesting. It uses the Shrine theming and some unique aspects. And it has a list, which I think, many apps have lists. And so I think building a list is always a fun exercise to get started. So this is, what you're looking at is this is the completed project, which will be on the link below on GitHub, but we'll actually walk through and implement this from the start. But this is the screen that we will end up building. What you can see here is there's some carts with 10 items and some pictures, some description of what it is, who the vendor could be, and the price. All right. So with that, I'm just going to move this aside for now. Or can it go away? Go away. I'll just minimize it. All right. So with Android Studio, let's get started. So what you can do is you can say file new project. Oh, why is this over here? Silly. So for the new project, what we're going to start with is the empty compose activity. We don't need to go in detail about what activity is, but that's probably for further investigation. But let's just start with empty compose activity. And what we'll do is we will just call this, let's call it Shrine. Don't need to worry so much about the package name. This is not really that important to get started. You want to put it somewhere on your machine. So in this case, I'll just call it, I already have multiple copies of this, so I'll call it Shrine Live just to make it clear for myself. As far as minimum API, again, I think because, here we're just trying to build out the app based on the design spec, we don't have to care so much about the minimum SDK. For those who are curious though, Compose does support all the way down to API 21, but for today, as long as you pick anything above 21, you should be good. I'm going to pick 26. It doesn't matter right now, but it's a nice number. All right. So once you hit finish, okay, we can close that because those things are kind of annoying. All right. So once you pick the new project with the empty compose template, you do have to give it a bit of time, although this is taking longer than I'd like. What is going on? Okay. It's building. Fun. All right. While that's happening, let's go back to Shrine. Yeah, so as mentioned before, we're going to cover the basics of building out the UI. We'll cover the material theming part. So Shrine, I think I mentioned before, has those unique kind of pastel-y pink colors in there. Also there's a unique font in it, which is Rubric. Rubric is, I like this font a lot. It's very fun and playful, and I think it matches the app well. It's easily accessible on Google Fonts, so that's what we'll also be using as part of the app. And as far as the material components that we're going to try to build out today, what we'll cover is material button, we'll cover a material card, and then we'll also work with some material icons as well. And then, like I said, we're building out that cart. So in that cart is going to be a list. And if all things go well, we will actually deploy it to an Android device, our first screen. All right, let's check back on Android Studio. Okay, things are good. All right, cool. So let's see. I'm going to go into split mode here. All right, gotta build. Cool. Let's see. Looking good. So while this is building, so Compose the language is Kotlin. So I think folks on the stream may not know exactly what Kotlin is. So in Android, the way to write apps before was with Java, and the way you built out your UI was using XML. So if you've ever done web development, like built a website, HTML is the base language of itself is XML also. So it was not too dissimilar to that. But with Compose, we're actually using a different language, which is Kotlin. Benefits being that everything you do to build your UI in Jetpack Compose is with Kotlin. So that's nice because from a programming language perspective, you really only need to know one language versus I think prior to that with the previous toolkit, you'd have to know a couple languages. Anyway, so it's successfully built. And so when I'll close this actually. Oh no, I'll leave it open. So when you start off, this is kind of like the hello world of the project. So let me zoom in this preview. And in this case, we call it Hello Android. So you have an activity. That's kind of the entry point to the application. And then there's going to be a theme, which we'll cover later. But in this case, it's called the Shrine theme. And within the Shrine theme, there is a surface, which uses the material color the background. And then we have, this thing called greeting with a parameter called Android. So if you scroll down a little bit on line 28, there is this composable function called greeting. So I think, I don't know if I explained this earlier, is that, Compose is the way you build your screens or your UI it's all these small composable functions. I think to me, it's very much like Figma where, sometimes you can start with one single frame and start building pieces of your app or design on one frame. But, as time goes on, you're like, okay, well, actually, I want to reuse this component or make this a component or for various screens. And so Compose is actually very similar, where you could start out building an entire screen, or you could take the other approach where you could start building out your design system in small components and then constructing screens from that. But everything is kind of a composable, so I'm going to say that word probably way too many times. But yeah, that's what I mean when I say composable. It's these small little functions, or if it helps, you can think about it as like frames in Figma or in Artboard in Sketch. So in this case, we have the greeting composable. It's going to take a parameter called name. It doesn't have to, but it's illustrated for this example. So within the greeting composable, you're going to have your first component, which is text. So text, it's text. It's very simple. Text has a parameter, which is like, what is the text you actually want to put in here? In this case, it's going to show the name that is passed in. So if you remember from line 20, it said Android, and so that's why it says hello Android. Now, if sorry. And the second important thing about Compose within Android Studio, which is really the thing we're looking at on the right, is this is a preview. So you'll notice above the composable, there's this other line that's annotated that says @preview. What that means is basically any composable that you want to see rendered on the design surface on the right, you can just put this preview annotation on top of it. And so in this case, we're calling this default preview. The name is automatically added there, but you can actually name it to whatever you want. So I can add another parameter called name and say, live frame. Oh. And see, it actually changed the name to live frame. And like I said, it's showing the greeting composable that we talked about before. In this case, it's showing I passed the word Android, but like if I change it to, greeting material, it actually changes to hello material. And that's the preview we're looking at. So like I said, like greeting is a composable, so it is a component in itself that's being reused, or like a frame. So right now, the only thing in greeting is text, but I can actually add, whoopsie. I can add a second piece of text here, or second component. I'll just call this is a subtitle. And then we will. So one thing to know about the preview in Android Studio is sometimes we can, depending on what code you write, we can opportunistically update the preview live. Other times it requires a rebuild. So the tool will tell you when it does require one, and so you can just hit that banner over there or use the keyboard shortcut. So in this case, I put the two pieces of text here, but it looks quite jumbled, and you're probably wondering why. It's like, because what's happening is by default, the way Compose works is everything kind of gets stacked on top of each other by default. And so, in Figma, you could think about it as like, everything, unless you put something in like an auto layout or you actually place them next to each other, everything can kind of overlap. And so with Compose, there's a couple of like layout concepts that we can use. They're pretty simple. There's box, row, and column. In this case, we'll put these both in column. So if you just start typing, you can say column. And it's like, so this is autocomplete. So it helps you kind of discover code as you write, so you don't have to remember everything in your head. So I'll add a column. And in this case, we don't need those extra parentheses. And I will just move these two text components inside of it. And so when I build and refresh, what you should see, come on, is now they actually are aligned nicely. So that's really kind of the basics of Compose is, you can lay things out. Components are called simple things. Let's see. You can, you can add padding. You can add other things. Like there's even a component called spacer. And with spacer, and you can actually say, let's see, 32 dp. So I added a spacer. It's in this red color here. What that means is that you just have to import the right symbol in. What you can do is you can just hit Alt-Enter on the keyboard, and then, and often this little pop-up menu will show up. And if there's an option at the top that says import, you just say import. In this case, we are just going to use compose, DP, and then height. There is a way to simplify that, but anyway, sorry. So DP is density independent pixels. That's what we encourage people to use when they are measuring out height and width and padding of their components in Compose. And the same thing is recommended on the material design website. It's just, I think if you were to think about it with Figma, DP is the same thing. Like if in Figma you said, okay, this frame is 100 by 100 pixels, in DPs, it's the same. It's 100 by 100. So you don't have to necessarily do the math. It's just DP is a nice density independent pixel, while like in Figma, pixel is density independent as well. 1 second. All right. So that's kind of the basics of Compose, but let's go back to material design and Shrine. So material design, every app, the design system starts with, it's a mix of picking a color palette, picking a type ramp, and then also applying shape or a shape system. So Shrine has its own unique color, typography, and shape. And so what we'll do right now is we'll actually set that up in your app. Going to the website, you can kind of see these are the colors that are unique to Shrine. They call them Shrine Pink. It's kind of this pastel-y pink, as we said before. Scrolling down to typography, we mentioned before that it's using Rubik. By default, material design uses Roboto, and that's a fine font to use. But I think it's really fun to pick a font that you feel fits the mood of your app. And so, like I said, with Rubik, I think it's a nice, fun font that I like it a lot. And so that's what we're going to use for Shrine. This kind of shows you how the type ramp is used in Shrine. We have some headline text, and we have some display and copy, and some body copy, some button. We'll probably not use all of them in building out our first screen, but it's all here if you want to see it. And then kind of jumping to shape, shape is a really fun way to kind of differentiate and really, I think, bring uniqueness to your app. And so, the way the shape system works in material design is you have small components, medium components, and large components. So small components have a specific shape, medium have a different shape, and large has a different shape. The unique shape in Shrine is kind of this cut corner style, which is quite unique because you don't see this enough. I think it's a cool style that I'd like to see more. Plenty of rounded corner designs out there, but cut corners is definitely not as pervasive as maybe it could be. In this case, that's kind of a hallmark of this Shrine design, is these cut corners. Specifically, kind of a unique thing is with any large component like a card, we only want to cut the corner on the top left corner, versus like maybe the button, you'd have cut corners on all four sides, or all four corners, like I said. Kind of talking about how it manifests itself. So small components are usually buttons. So we have the 4 cut corners. A medium component's like a card or a drop-down menu. And then a large component it could also be a card, but it's also kind of these larger surfaces that hold a lot more content. Yep. So those are kind of the 3 things we'll do. And what we want to do is set up our Compose project to take advantage of all these unique theming values for Shrine. So how do we do that? So what we do actually by default in the new project template is we give you 4 files that are all under this UI.theme folder. So we have color, we have shape, we have theme, and then we have type. And this is intentional. Like, we want to map it directly to how we express it in the material design website. That way, as designers, like if you're designing something with the material system in mind, when you're working with your developers, they're using the same language, the same concepts. And so everyone is aligned on like what color means and what shape means and what themes and type and themes mean between both designers and developers. So, material design has a baseline palette. It's kind of this purple teal motif here. Like I said, I think typography is usually Roboto. In this case, we just call it fontfamily.default because Roboto is the default in Android. And then this is kind of the default shape theme. So for small shapes, it will be 4. For medium components, it will be 4 DP with rounded corners. And then for large, there's no rounded corners. It's just straight. But let's start with color. So, we mentioned that Shrine has these unique pink colors, right? So let me jump back to color. So these are kind of the unique colors. There are some color values here. And so I've already gone ahead and done this. So what we can do is just copy paste that color into our project. I actually closed the other project, so I probably need to bring that back up. One sec. I'll do that in a new window. I'll just make this window really small. So these are the existing colors that we have here, but what we're going to do is bring the Shrine colors in instead. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete this because we're going to use in completely different colors. We'll use Shrine. Let's see. We probably won't use all these colors, but they're here for reference because, in further lessons, we'll probably use them, but we won't use all of them today. Colors in Android are expressed. It looks a little bizarre, I will admit, but it is expressed in kind of hex values. So if you just, for designers, I think we're used to looking at colors in hex and only 6 characters. So if you look at the last 6, that's the color. The 2 before, it is part of the hex, but that's more the transparency. And then the 0x is just how it's expressed. Oop, crap. If you do want to play around with colors, though, in Android Studio, you can do that. If you click the little color block on the gutter, we actually have this nice color picker here. And we actually have like the original material color palette here as well. This won't be needed for today, but if you do want to experiment with color, it is here. And like I said, those first 2 letters, the FF is the alpha. So, as designers, usually alpha is expressed in percentage. And so you can use this to calculate what that will be. And the tool will do it for you. But we're not going to do that anyway today. We're just going to use, let's just undo that. Okay. So these are the colors we'll use from Shrine. And this is, again, all in the GitHub project that will be in the description. Where are we? Cool. All right. So then we want to use these colors in a color palette. I'm going to copy paste this here and explain a little bit about what's going on. So material design, like I said, material design has 2 color palettes by default. There's a light color palette and there's a dark color palette. Shrine doesn't have a dark theme, but I think maybe in a future stream, we could probably experiment with that. But for now, we're just going to stick to a light color palette because that's what we have. If you notice, it says there's this word that says light colors. And then if you look at the top, it also relates to, there's a compose.material.light colors. So if I were to command click, or you can hit Command B on your keyboard or Control B, you can navigate to the source code of Compose, but what it shows is all the color keys for the light color palette. These values are identical to what you would find on material.io. So if we go to, actually this is in Figma, right, you have this baseline kit that we have from the material design team. The color scheme by default, you notice these values and names are identical. So primary variant, secondary, background, surface, etc. We have the same exact colors baked into Compose. So if you didn't deviate at all on colors, you could just use the material colors as is. But I think it's more interesting to use unique brand colors, which is what we're going to do with Shrine. And so what I'm doing here is I'm overriding the light color palette. And what that means is I'm just saying, by default, don't use the material colors. Use my Shrine Pink 100 for primary. Use my Shrine Pink 500. Just use all the shrine colors instead of the material colors. And even this error color, although we probably won't have any errors in our code today, hopefully. All right. So those are colors. And those are pretty easy to set up, but let's do something a little more interesting. So with typography, we mentioned we are using Rubik. The thing to know with type is, so we're going to use Rubik, and so we have to download the Rubik font from Google Fonts and then put those font files in our project. The way to do that is, it's not the most straightforward, unfortunately, right now, but we can hopefully fix that, but I'll walk you through it now. What you do is you go to your resource folder in your Android project, and it's this directory called res. For those who aren't familiar, the res directory or resource directory in an Android project is usually where you would put fonts, your images, just a bunch of other resources that are not necessarily code, but they are useful for your app. So for today, what we're going to be putting in there is the font files for Rubik. And then I think I showed you before in the cart, there are some images of some cart items. We'll be putting those PNGs and JPEGs in this same folder as well. So for res, what we'll do is we'll create a new Android resource directory. It's a font directory. You just have to pick font from the resource type. Hit OK. You don't need to touch anything else. And what I find is the easiest thing to do in this case for fonts is just to open that folder in the Finder. And then what I will do is, I already have the font files downloaded. So let's see. Where did it go? Oh. Yeah. So I have these font files already from the previous thing. So you can just copy and paste them in here. Yep. All right. And then this should refresh in a second. Yep. So now if you see it, you see all your fonts. One random tidbit to know, and this is, as a designer, I didn't really realize this, but in Android, all resources, they have to be, I think they prefer them to be lowercase, and they don't accept dashes or hyphens. You have to use underscores. Small thing that is kind of like tribal knowledge, I guess, with Android, but as a designer, never had to think about that, but that kind of tripped me up when I was doing this. And so I've gone ahead and done that for you because it's just kind of a detail that I hope one doesn't have to always think about. All right. So we have our fonts in our project, which will be necessary for actually using Rubik in the app. I will just copy paste this code here because setting this up is, walking through it is not the most interesting. So what you can do is just delete all the code there. I'll just paste it. I think I talked about it before, like sometimes these red things say it can't find this object. In this case, it's font. Android Studio has a nice, if you just keep hitting Alt Enter, it's usually an easy way to fix things. And then R. So R is just a simple way, is just, it represents all resources in your project. And so if you remember before, we created that font folder in the resource directory. And so that's why it reads r.font.rubik. That will come into play more when we use the images as well. So I've written this code already, but it's not too difficult to read. So we have a typography setup. And so in this case, we have, and so all of these styles are taken from the material type ramp. So the H1 all the way through H6, subtitles, body, etc. I've gone ahead and said that basically everything in our type ramp is going to use Rubik because that's the font we want for Shrine. But you can, if your app has multiple fonts, you can also declare multiple fonts and change them in the type styles. But in this case, we're only going to use Rubik. And all this information all of this code that I wrote is just maps to the design spec that's on material.io. So when I did write the code, I basically just took this image here and said, okay, like for H1, it's going to be Rubik, it's going to be the light variant, and it's going to be 96 SP. And the same with H1 and further down. And so that's what I've done here, just to get things set up. And the way it's described on the design spec is very close to how it's described in code. So there's font family, font weight, font size, letter spacing. And then again, that's intentional because we want to make it easier for developers and designers to work together, especially when they're using material design. So we don't have to relearn concepts when we work together or hand off specs or code. All right. So we have all the type here and we have all the color. But you're probably wondering, how do we even verify that this is all working, right? So what we can do is in our theme file, this is actually, so the Shrine theme is really using material theme under the hood. And what we're saying with the Shrine theme is the Shrine theme is going to have its own color palette. It's going to have its own type ramp, and it's going to have its own shapes. And so we already configured the color palette and the type ramp, but we actually haven't hooked it up to the theme yet. So there is some code in here that gets you started, but we will delete that for now. And like I said, Shrine is only a light color palette, so we won't need the dark theme for now. But if we do in the future, then we can always revisit this. So I'm just going to delete this. Let's see. And it's not going to be dark theme, so it doesn't matter. All right. So with colors, it's red. It doesn't like it. So what we can do is if we go back to our color file, we created this color palette before that I mentioned. It's called the Shrine Light Color Palette. We can just copy paste it and put it here. And what we're saying is that for this material theme, the colors, we're going to use that light color palette. And then for typography, we actually set it here to say typography. I think what I can do is to make it a little more clear is I'll just call it Shrine Typography. And I think I broke it because it didn't, I have to rename it, but that makes it a little clear, like this is the Shrine typography that we're going to use. And then actually let's touch on shape quickly. So these are the shapes. I think I'll just call it Shrine shapes just to make it very clear that this is Shrine specific. Go back to theme, copy paste. All right. So for shape, I think we were talking about how the unique aspect of the Shrine design is the cut corners. So I have that code already here. There is a cut corner shape. In the case with small, it's 4 cut corners on all sides. For medium, it's 8 on all sides. And then for large, it's the top left is 24 dp. It's called top start. Reason being is, for right to left layouts, start is the right instead of the left. So in Android, we just say top start. So depending on your locale, it should act accordingly. So I will just, I'll just copy these values here, put them inside. Cool. So now we have color, shape, and type all set for Shrine. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use preview to actually show that these things are working in your app. So if I go back to my project that I've already done, just to walk you through it. What I like to do is I like to create kind of like theme tests to make sure my theme is working. Like for example, we're using Rubik, and so as the font. So I'll build a preview out here. I'll just copy paste it for now and just explain it. So we have a composable, we have a preview. I'm just going to call it the typography theme test. Oh, it doesn't like the old code. So we're using the Shrine theme. I think we mentioned the column concept before, and we're just going to throw a bunch of text in here to just kind of illustrate like how all the typography styles are being applied to text. And so if I hit build and refresh, take some time. It's one of the things that is a little annoying about the flow right now is that. All right, here we go. I can zoom out. So we have a bunch of text styles shown in the preview, but this is kind of just showing you that like the theming is working. So in this case, we have text, H, and the value of the text is h1/Rubik Light. The style it's using is from the material theme. It's using typography and h1. It's a little confusing why it's not shrine theme. It's a little hard to explain, but just bear with me that, you know, this is how you should write it. And actually for button, you know, usually button is uppercase. And so, you know, this is just showing like in code, you can basically uppercase anything by using this function. But yeah, these are kind of the unique type styles that we will be using for today. But you can see they're all using Rubik, which is good. It's not using Roboto. So that I usually have that just to make sure that the type styles are wired up correctly. So for example, like, you know, I think in the H1, it should be 96 SP and Rubik Light. If I were to go back to my type file and I have H1 here, let's just pretend it's not Rubik, and I delete it. So if I go back and then I think that worked pretty instantaneously. But let me go backwards here. It's still rendering the preview. So, yep, there we go. Yes. So now this H1 here is using Roboto, not Rubik. But that's just kind of showing you that, hey, the theme is working. So I'll just undo that because we do want to use Rubik. And then we can rebuild the preview, but you don't need to because we've already verified that it works before. Let's see. Okay. So the other thing too is, like I said, you know, the colors are unique in Shrine and the shape is unique in Shrine. So I also want to build kind of a preview to verify that the components in our app are themed correctly. So let's do that. Oh, yeah, the rubric is there. So we'll build another preview. You can type this out manually, or if you type PRV, there's a shortcut. And if you hit enter, it generates the code for you. And so here we'll just say this is a Shrine component test. All right. So first thing we do is we just make sure whatever we're styling is according to the Shrine theme that we configured. In this case, I'm probably going to use a couple of buttons to illustrate my point. So let's just put things in a column because columns are easy. We will add a button. Button does require an on-click parameter, but we're not going to make these buttons interactive, so you don't actually have to do anything. You can just kind of leave it empty and that should work. But within button, the way button works is that button doesn't have necessarily a parameter that's text. Button has a parameter that's like, what are the contents of the button that you want to put in it? So in this case, it's text. And I'll say text equals, this is a button. Or I'll just say this is a Shrine button, actually. Okay. Let's build and refresh. Now I'll kind of come back to that comment I made just now about the button. All right, cool. Oh, gotta zoom in a little bit. Actually, you know, let's hide this typography thing because it's a little distracting. You can just comment out the code. That's command slash, makes it all gray, but if you comment it out, it just disappears, which is what we want because we want to kind of focus on the button. The other thing, so I did this. Oh, actually, what we can do is make this a series of columns. So let's just make one big preview. I will do this. So, and I'm doing this just for comparison. So this is a material button. I'll call it baseline. All right. All right, preview is rendering. Let's see. So what I'm doing here is I want to illustrate like the difference between the shrine theme and the material theme. So as you can see, you know, oh, this is kind of dark. I think what I'll do is I will put a background so this is easier to see. So in preview, you can, you know, by default, it doesn't show a background. This is kind of similar actually to Figma where a frame doesn't have a background by default. You can kind of turn the fill on if you want, but sometimes it's better to not show a background. So in this case, preview doesn't have a background by default, but you can add a white one if you want. You can change the background color too if you'd like. The button kind of goes edge to edge here, so it's kind of hard to see the corners. So I'm going to add a modifier. Modifiers are a whole nother thing to dive into in Jetpack Compose, but to put it quickly, you know, for us as designers, you know, modifiers are really meant, they're used for things like padding or for alignment, or they're used for a lot of things actually in Compose, but you can think about it as like, that's how you apply padding. And so we use modifiers to basically modify components in Compose. So you can, the way you declare padding for column is the same way you declare padding for button, and other things like rows and boxes and checkboxes, etc. So that's, you'll probably see this modifier word used many times. But let's see. We put 32 DP padding around it. I don't know why the preview didn't update, but this should make it so we can kind of see the corners a little better. Come on. There we go. Yeah. Okay. And actually there's a very, very easy way to add spacing. If you ever want random spacing in Compose, you just use spacer. I think I said this before actually. So in this case, I just want some space between the two buttons. So I'm just going to add a modifier and just put, you know, I'll put 32 DP here too. Okay. All right, we'll build and refresh. Cool. Come on. It will render. Yep, there we go. So you can see here, it's like the shrine button is using Rubik. The material button is using Roboto. And the shrine button has these cut corners here, while the material button does not, has this rounded corners. So this is kind of one test to show like, oh, I think the shapes that we put in the theme are working. The type is working because it's using Rubik, and the colors are working because the default color of a button is usually the primary color. So in this case, in the baseline theme, it's this purple primary color we have, but in Shrine, it's the, if we go back to our color file, primary is Shrine Pink 100. And so because we set that in the theme, that's what the primary ends up being. And, you know, it's great because I think these previews can kind of, you can use it side by side with your code to just verify along the way that like things are working. So in this case, like, you know, if I wanted to see are the colors actually working? You know, what if we just faked it and said, you know what, the primary theme in Shrine should be black. So, yeah, let's just do that just for dramatic effect. Yeah, and there we go. Yeah, see, it's got this terrible black as the background, so you can't even see it, but it illustrates the point that the themes are working as expected or as set up. All right, let's see where we're at. Okay. So I think the theme is set up correctly. I think what we will do just for fun though, to kind of show you how to build out more components in Compose, there is this one button in Shrine that and this is a button we will be reusing, is this kind of add to cart button. It has this fun logo, has this uppercase style, and then the cut corners. So let's actually try to build that. So we have the right cut corners, but we don't have the right font variant, and we don't have that icon. So, for the text, to make it all caps, that's pretty easy. I think I said before, you just, on this string, you just say dot uppercase, and that will uppercase it. It'll uppercase in a sec when I rebuild the preview. And then we're going to want to add an icon. So actually, this is a good time to talk about Compose. And Figma. Let's go to the button. So this is the baseline sticker sheet in Figma. But I want to talk a little bit about buttons. Yes. Because buttons, I think everyone knows what a button is, and it's like a very simple UI concept, but it kind of is an important thing to think about in the grand scheme of all of Compose. So in Material, we have, these are like the icon or toggle buttons, but like, let's just think about these buttons for now. We have, I think it's called the text button. We have a outline button, and then we have, I think some people call it a contained button or just button. And sometimes buttons can have icons in them in Material. Sometimes they can have more than that. And so, I think one way to approach it is in Figma, when you create a button, when you're creating these variants of the button, you could create a variant that's like, oh, the variant is it has an icon or it doesn't have an icon, or it's an outline button or not an outline button or text button. So if you were to use Figma to create variants, these would probably be the 6 variants you would have for button. But the thing is, it's still, that works, but can it be more flexible? Like, what if you wanted to make this icon bigger? I think by default, the Material icons are about 24 dp. But, for whatever reason, depending on your app or design, like you wanted a bigger icon. Or, maybe you didn't want an icon, but you wanted like a gradient in the back of the button. So all these variations of button make it kind of hard to create a consistent set of variants sometimes. Like, variants are great, but sometimes there's not enough flexibility with them. With Compose, there's actually a lot of flexibility that I kind of wish Figma had. And it's actually this very simple concept of what we call like a slot, or technically it's called the slot-based API. So for button, to kind of tie back to button, it's like within button there, you can put whatever you want in this button. Most of the time we'll just tell you to put text and it will nicely center align it. But in this case, we can put an icon. And with icons, what's cool about Compose is that we give you access to all the Material icons. Actually, I forgot, it's called icons.default. Oh, actually, no. Whoa. I did not mean to do that. Dot face. Okay. And then we do require you to add a content description for accessibility reasons, but I'll just call this face for now. All right. Let's go. Oh, there we go. So we had the uppercase text. There's now an icon. And like I said, I think it's with Compose, because of this slot-based approach, you have the ability that like this, the slot itself is this frame that has more flexibility. So, you know, I added icon, I added text. I mean, I could add spacers too. So in this case, we actually do want some spacers. So let's do 48 dp for now. And there we go. Yeah. So I think the thing is, like, that's kind of conceptually how to think about it in Compose, is that like you could create variants of things. Like creating a variant in this case is like, let's say you really did like this. You could extract this as its own composable and say this is like the shrine button variant. We'll just do that just so you can see. Yep, and we'll just call this shrine button. All right. So it ends up creating a function called shrine button. But I think kind of what I was saying was like, so now this component only has this face icon. But what if you want to change the face icon on the fly? You could create a parameter for that if you wanted to. But this, I think adding things like spacers or not having an icon, I think gives you more flexibility with the slot-based approach. I'm probably explaining this pretty poorly, but I think it's a cool thing to think about as you're building things out or trying to map it to Figma. Anyway, let's see. I think I've gone off track now. Yes. So we've covered. Yep. So we've covered kind of the simple material components. We've checked that the shrine theme is working and it's applied. So let's actually build the cart. All right. So the way we're going to do that is you're going to create a new file. We'll just call it cart. It's empty file for now. I will just add a composable function, call it cart. Don't need any parameters. We will probably want a preview of the cart, just so we can code and design it as we go along. I'll just call it cart preview. We want to use our shrine theme in the preview. And import that. And so, just to start off with cart, we'll probably have a column. Actually, I think just to shortcut it, let's take our example from before. Paste it here. We don't need that baseline button anymore. We don't need some of this. Let's just say text. Hello, cart. Actually, let's do a button. Do that. Oh. Button on click equals blah. Okay. Going a little faster now, but that's okay. So usually, like when I build out any UI in Compose, I always kind of have the function, which is the code itself, and then I have a preview just to complement it, just so as I code, I can actually see a visual preview of what I'm coding and kind of check my work as I go. And what the cart we're building, actually, if I go back to this Figma file, this is a final design spec of the cart. We're not going to build all of this. There's a little too much complexity for today, but we'll generally try to build some of this at the end of this stream. All right. So we have our button. Okay. So if we break it down, there's the things we're going to build is we're going to want to have the word cart, the number of items, probably this little drop, this down arrow. We'll have these dividers. We will have this remove button here. I think for each item in the cart, we'll have a picture. We will do the vendor, the price, and then the name of the item. And I think that's all we'll do. And at the very bottom of the screen, we'll have the proceed to checkout button. So let's start out with the button. In this case, the cart is going to sit on a surface. Surface is, you can think about it as like if you put any kind of content, especially text, in your layouts, you should put it within a surface. What that does is it works really well with material theming, where it makes sure that all the text that sits in a surface has the right contrast, and also just make sure the colors work well without you having to do too much work. I'll move the column into the surface just so we have a nice auto layout here. With surface, I'm actually going to change the background color of the surface because I think the default color isn't exactly what we want. So I think this colors dot background. Okay. And what this means is like I'm always going to like use the shrine theme color. So the background color is, what is the background color? It's shrine pink 100. That's what we're probably going to end up using for the cart. So if we go back to the cart, we can remove this padding because it's going to get distracting. The button, it's going to say proceed to checkout. So let's do that. Dot uppercase as before. Let's see. And another modifier is always useful is it's called fill max size. It's just an easy way to just say, hey, take this UI component and just make it as big as possible. Just fill the space that you have. And so let's see. We're building. Cool. All right, so the buttons, actually, oh, you know what? I did make a mistake. I think the surface shouldn't be the same color as the button because then they look exactly the same. Yeah. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it is actually supposed to be surface. That doesn't look right. Oh, that looks better, I think. But that doesn't seem completely right. I think Shrine 100. Oh, I guess it is. It's just a very faint pink. All right. Anyway, we have the button on the bottom, but if you notice in the mockup, the button spans the entire width and it has some padding on the bottom. So the column which the button's sitting in is taking up the whole width and height, but the button is not. So we can also add modifiers to buttons. To be clear, we can have a modifier parameter, say modifier dot fill max width. Because we don't actually want it to change height, we just want it to fill the max width. Oh, and the other thing about modifiers is that you can chain them together. So we want to add padding around the button too, because you can kind of see here the padding it's about 16 on the left and the right and 24 at the bottom. So padding can easily be applied with modifiers. You can say padding, and then you can set padding either on all four sides. You can set padding horizontally, vertically. So I think horizontally it was 16 dp, and then vertically it's about 24. All right. as we're waiting, let's see. Yep, there we go. So looks a little better. All right, so what else do we need? We need the cart things. So we need the cart and the number of items. Let's see. Everything's in a column, kind of like auto layout. So these three things, sorry, are all kind of in a row. So we can use row now, which we didn't use before. And the three things we're going to do is add an icon. I'm just going to write the icon code later, but text, we'll just say cart, and then we'll just fake it for now, and you'll see why. It'll say 2 items, or 3 items. This is all uppercase. All right. And then we're just gonna put an icon button there. An icon button is, if we go back to our baseline, an icon button is sort of like this, except I think in Compose we don't have this border, but it's basically we put a material icon in a button that uses a material icon, so you can click it and it will interact, which we'll need at some point, but this kind of just simplifies it. Within the icon button, you can put an icon. In this case, I'm going to use the image vector, which the icon we're going to need is the down arrow. So I think that's default.keyboard arrow down. Content description, this is for the screen reader for accessibility. Just say, you don't have to name it precisely at this point. You can just say down arrow. There'll probably be some space between these things, so let me just zoom in. Between cart and the items, it's 12, and then between cart and the icon button, it's about 16. Although the icon button has a lot more padding, so maybe it's a little different, but we can just use spacers like I was showing before. All right, 12. This all looks okay. Let's just build and refresh to check our work, make sure we're on track. Okay, oh, we are on track, good. This is looking better, but the alignment is a little weird. So with row, kind of like similar to auto layout in Figma, you can arrange the alignment of the children within the row. So in this case, we want them to be vertically centered. So there is a parameter called vertical arrangement. I don't know why it's taking so long to figure that out. Oh no, sorry, it's vertical alignment. Alignment dot center vertically. What's kind of neat actually about row and column is they each have an arrangement parameter as well, which I was using spacers to space things around, which you can do, which is like a more manual way to do it. But the arrangement parameters for, in the case of row, there's horizontal arrangement, in column it's vertical arrangement, but that's also a way to do things like space things evenly, space things between, or you can uniformly say, I want to put, X amount of DP between every element in there, which is kind of nice because doing that in the past was always kind of annoying. But you can see, yep, things are centered vertically. That looks good. So we have that top title. Now we want to add the cart items. Let's see. And I think, I won't type this out because it will probably take a little long. Yeah, it's a lot of code. Yeah, let's just do that. Okay. close that. We'll make this window a little smaller. Come on. There we go. All right. Nice thing in Android Studio is you can collapse code, so in case you need to like see things. And what I'll do is I'll delete a bunch of this because I will explain this in a sec. Oh. And then this will just be, yeah. Okay. Oh, interesting. We don't have this icon. It doesn't know it does because we did not add all of the icons into our project. You can actually do that. So I'm going to go back. So the material icon set is pretty large. So by default, your Compose project won't have access to every single icon, but there is a library called the Material Extended Icons library, or Material Icons Extended. This gives you access to all of the icons. All right. So we had to do a Gradle sync to bring that in. And so now we actually have the remove circle outline. Just fixing some code because it's not going to work. Oh, whoops. Actually, I was looking at the wrong project. Yep, here we go. Oh, okay, that's weird. Why? Oh. What is going on? Something is frozen. I'm going to close that. Okay. Okay. Let's see where we're at. Okay. Need the preview to actually update. Be a little easier to explain. Okay. Yes. Thank you for telling me you don't like something. That makes sense. Yes. Okay. Here we go. Took a little while. Had to shake the tree a little bit, but we added the material icons, all the material icons to our project, and so now it actually finally finds that there is this icon called remove circle outline. So we're going. What is it doing? It's doing a lot of things. Too many things. Okay. All right. So now we have the right icons. We have the vendor. We have the price. I kind of shortcutted it, but the item here, you can see it is essentially, it starts with a row. It fills the entire space because we want the whole row to fill it. It centers things vertically in vertical alignment because we want the icon and then the text. And you'll see when I bring the image in to center vertically. The remove circle is an icon button, very similar to the down arrow button before, with different padding. And then, we want the text, the vendor, the price, and the title to kind of be in its own container. So kind of just thinking about auto layout and how you would do it in Figma. We would probably, I just decided to go with a column. because what I want to do is actually put vendor and price on the same line so that they line up nicely, and then title on a second line. So for the column, like I put a divider above it, and then I added a row which puts a bunch of these things together. So like I said, I wanted the vendor and the price in the same row, and then I wanted the item title on below it. And so this is kind of showing you, like, I'm using fill max width to make sure that like vendor and price fill the available amount of space. But I think I mentioned the arrangement parameter before. I'm saying arrangement dot space between because rather than having vendor and price right next to each other, which would happen by default, you can set the arrangement to say actually place yourselves as far away as possible so that it pushes both of them to the very ends of the row. And because the row takes up the max width, it will push them to the ends like so. And we put some padding around it. So I think what we are missing is an image. So let's see. The image should go, where should it go? I can't remember where it goes. I think it goes after here. Oh no, it goes here. So for image, we don't have I'm gonna put all the images that I was showing before in the project, but there are a few that we can use just for example. So there's these drawables, which are the kind of image assets you would use in Android. So you can say resource.drawable. Let's just use the background one. For all images and icons, we encourage people to use a content description. Let's see, item image. All right. We're going to import it. Why doesn't it like it? It says, what is the error? Oh, painter. Oh, right. What is it is painter resource? Yeah, there we go. Kind of a technical detail, but this is how you pass in drawables or things that are not vectors. All right, so now, seems the tool broke. Oh, there we go. The toolbar disappeared. That was weird. One thing you'll notice too is we actually haven't even deployed this app or screen to device. We've been doing all of this in Android Studio, which is one of the great things about Preview is you can build out your entire UI, or you can, you don't have to use you don't have to deploy to device. You can do a lot of the iterations just within Android Studio, never deploy to device, which I think makes it nice and flexible to iterate and explore. All right, so it puts this ugly green image here. That's what what the item image is going to be in this list of things. Let's see what we can do now is to fake it. We can say like, let's pretend there's going to be 5 items in the cart. So I'm going to create a variable called cart size. It's just going to be 6. But we can use this cart size in several places. We can use it in the text that actually describes the amount of items. So this can actually make it a little more dynamic. So here I can just put $ cart size, and that's a way to pass a variable in a string. And then for the row, what we can do is we can create a for loop. So for loop is allows you to do a specific task multiple times. In this case, we're going to make it do something 6 times. And so I always forget how to type for loops in Kotlin. I think it's, and what I'm about to do is what every developer does, for loop. You can't expect to remember everything. So I do this very often, and I think, especially as the designer, where I don't code all day, I'm just like, how do I do a for loop? I know what a for loop does, but I don't remember how to do it. Okay. So, yeah. All right. So in the for loop, we're going to go from I, which is I is it will be the index per part of the loop. We're going to go from 0 to cart size. In this case, cart size is 6. Hit refresh. And what that should do is you should see this cart item show up 6 times. Although it may show up 7 times depending on how I did the math. Yep. Boom. There we go. Oh, whoa. What is happening? Okay. So it's showing up a bunch of times. It's weird. I don't know what's going on there. I think what I probably have to do is... Actually, I'm not sure what I have to do, but I will ignore that for now. And, we can use this I variable multiple times. So we can say, for vendor, you could add it here and say vendor I. For price, you could say price I. And then title, it's like title of item I. And if the preview comes back, okay, while that's happening, we're going to add images here anyway. So I'm going to just set that up for now. Oh, yep. So as you can see, when I added I to the description, to the title of things, it all shows up. So now the for loop's working because it's going from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, etc. So let's see. I always lose track of this stuff. All right. So I'm gonna, we'll add 9 images. Of course, it did that. Okay, God. Okay, there we go. Okay. So we're adding 9 images to our project. It should show up on the left. Yep. The other thing I will do, just to shortcut this, is we're going to put some sample data in here just to make this this list more interesting. So let's see. I do have the sample data in my previous project, which will be in the GitHub link. Yeah. So I will just copy paste this here. And this is just some data just to make our UI more interesting. So we have to create kind of a data class to keep all the item information for the list. So there's going to be an ID, which is that I value I was talking about. We'll put a fake title, fake price. We have some fake vendors, of course. And then we have the photo ID. So I added those 9 photos. We're probably going to put 10 or so items in here. And so if we go back to our preview or our cart, what we'll do is we'll bring in the sample data. It's called sample items data. So I will just create. So the for loop instead, what we can do is rather than iterate through 6 random numbers, we can actually just iterate through the sample data itself. Sample items data. And then this is a different kind of for loop. It's called for each. And what it means is it just says for each item in this array or this list of data, do something. And then we can say item just to make it clear. So, so for each item, like I said, each item has a vendor, a title, a price, a photo, and an ID. So for the item image, rather than putting this fake background that we had before, we can just pass the photo ID. And then for the vendor name, we don't need to use that anymore. We can say, oh, you have to put $, then you have to put these curly brackets. This is just how you do it in Kotlin. So item.vendor. And then probably have a $sign for now. Item.price. And then this will be item.title. All right. So if all went to plan, this should now actually load the sample data correctly. And while it's rendering, oh, actually, so before I was using this fake value of cart size 6. Now that we actually have a list of data, oh, ta-da! Like, so you can see actually the photos did come in, which is cool. It doesn't have all of them, but let's just fix a couple of things. So for cart items, let's actually just use the size of the sample data. So we can put it in these curly brackets and say .size. Curious actually. So there's an interactive mode in Android Studio as well for the preview. Interactive mode is cool. It's experimental right now, but you can enable it in the settings. But it allows you to actually interact with the preview as if it were a real app. So I think if you remember correctly, I was using an icon button. All right, so I think we're good here. The last thing we can do, if we rewind all the way back to the beginning, I said that the main activity is really the entry point of your app. We built out this entire cart screen here, but it's actually not hooked up to our app yet. You'll see in a sec. So in Android Studio, you can go to the top right here to deploy your app. So usually when you create your first project, we create this app run configuration. And then there's an emulator that you can run it on. If you have an Android phone, you can also plug it in and deploy it to that. In this case, we have a Pixel 4 XL emulator set up. If I hit the play button, which is run, what should happen is it will deploy, it will build and compile the app, and then deploy it to the emulator. Emulators, if you're familiar with Xcode or iOS, it's the simulator, but it's basically, if you don't have a phone, this is a great way to have a fake phone on your computer. And with Android, it can be important because there's so many Android devices out there that are all kind of unique. So the emulator allows you to test on various different devices that you may not have readily available. So it does take a second to build and run the first time. Maybe too long, honestly, but while that's happening, let's just go back and review what happened. Just close a bunch of files. So our theme is set up correctly. We built our first cart screen. Okay. And all right, so why did it not succeed? Unknown. Okay. Sometimes it fails and you just have to retry. While that's doing its thing, so ideally, once you've polished everything, this is kind of what it should look like. Kind of tying back to Figma, we're componentizing a lot of the UIs. So, we had the cart items and the cart thing at the top. I called it its own little component called cart header, and you can preview it on its own. Same with cart item. So each item in the list can be its own component because it's a list of these. And so you can also componentize that out again. And then you can kind of put the two together and then show them as a screen. And so this model of putting everything in these small composable functions, I think fits really well with how we think about it as designers when we build design systems and build frames and components and variants all in Figma. And I think maybe the interactive preview will work here. So, yep. So with interactive mode, it's a little laggy just because there's way too much going on my machine. But I can kind of click and drag the screen as if it were my finger, and it can scroll. And you can see at the bottom, there's that add to cart button, or I think we called it proceed to checkout back then. But yeah, so it's kind of cool because you don't actually have to use the emulator to test out interactive preview. You can just do it all within Android Studio. And this, interactive mode is a great way to test out your components. Like if they respond to finger taps, or if you want to check, try animation, or just check that scrolling works. Interactive mode is a good way to do that. All right, I just don't think this is happening today. Anyway, if it worked, unfortunately it's not. To deploy it to the device, it's actually pretty easy. Before this was the main entry point, which is main activity. All you'd have to do is delete this code and then replace it with cart. Because cart is what we declared before. We kind of showed you how to do it in the preview here. So the code is very similar. You just go to main activity within this set content method and just paste cart. And if I were to hit run and, as I speak, so it must know that I was talking bad about it because now it's working. Okay, the pixel is starting. Okay. Hopefully it's ready now. The device is online. It's installing. Taking a long time to install a tiny app. It finally launched the activity. Come on. You can do it. Ta-da! Okay. So the cart we built earlier is now here. As we had built in Android Studio. The proceed to checkout button is at the bottom. It kind of disappeared when we were building stuff. But yeah, it was always there because it's at the bottom of these 10 things. Cool. All right. That could have gone better, but I'll call it a day. All right. So, that concludes the stream. Let's see. Yeah, so to recap, we went over the basics of building UI. We went over material theming, how to set it up for Shrine. We used some material components like button. We didn't use card, but that's okay. It's there, and there's many other components to try out. We used icons. We created a list, very simple list with a column and row. We used preview a ton to see how we were building stuff as we went. And we actually did deploy our first screen to a device, even though it took forever. But yeah, hopefully you now have a better understanding of how to use material design and Jetpack Compose and how they kind of go hand in hand. And hopefully this will inspire you to start playing around with Compose to bring your ideas to life on Android. Make sure to look in the title description for the link to the GitHub repo. And if you like this stream, be sure to like and subscribe. That's it. Thank you.